Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon. I am Jessica Kennedy, the Educator for Adult Learning and Access for All Program Director here at the St. Louis Art Museum. I'm so happy to welcome you to the museum for today's Joanne and Alan Cohn lecture presented by the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park. Since 2008, our two institutions have worked together to present an annual lecture on the work of Frank Lloyd Wright. Following the lecture, our speaker will take questions from the audience. If you just raise your hand, myself or another staff member will come to you with a microphone, so please wait until we get to you. And to get us started, I'd like to welcome to the stage Claire Davis, Board Chair of the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park, who will introduce today's speaker.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jessica and the St. Louis Art Museum, for your partnership with us on this lecture again this year. And thank you, all of you, for your attendance. Clearly, we share an enthusiasm for historic preservation and the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright. In this year's lecture, we will explore how our organization, the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park, is using a values-based approach to preservation to ensure that the house will exist to inspire many generations to come. There's no better person to talk about this approach than Gunny Harbaugh. Gunny is an internationally recognized architect dedicated to the recognition, preservation, and conservation of the world's cultural heritage. His architecture firm in Chicago focuses on historic preservation and sustainable design. He's worked on many iconic modern masterpieces, including numerous works by Mies van der Rohe, Louis Sullivan, and Frank Lloyd Wright. He has undertaken major restoration projects for Taliesin, Taliesin West, Unity Temple, and of course, our own Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park. He developed a conservation management plan for us, and he's now providing leadership for our roof preservation project. As many of you know, this lecture is named in tribute to our former board chair, Joanne Cohn, who recently passed away. In light of her many years of service, preserving the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park, our focus on the topic of preservation this afternoon is particularly poignant and furthers Joanne's legacy. And without further ado, here is Gunny.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you all for coming. It is a great honor to be here to give this Joanne and Alan Cohn lecture, but also quite sad that Joanne can't be here with us. And I met Joanne, I believe it was 2012. We were both serving on the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy together. And I remember her telling me about the Krause House and how excited she was that they had found a way to save the house and restore the house and wanted to be preserving the house in perpetuity. And I always enjoyed my interactions with her. And in fact, I was very honored. Also, I was here in 2018 to give a talk about our work at Unity Temple. And she was here for that. And I definitely enjoyed my interaction with her. I know that she'll be greatly missed both in the St. Louis art community as well as the Frank Lloyd Wright community nationwide, because she was a very active member of that board for quite some time. So, as was mentioned, I've had the great privilege to have worked on a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright projects. This is some of them you see here all over the country and from different periods of his oeuvre. It's been a fascinating journey to really get to understand what Wright was about. I'm very careful to say I don't claim to be a Wright expert in the sense of the historians that have devoted many, many years of their lives to doing deep dives and writing books and so on. But I do think I've gained a pretty good understanding of what he was about as an architect and some about what he was about in his life. He was a fascinating person and complicated in many, many ways. My journey with him actually started in the early 1980s. After finishing a master's degree at Columbia University in historic preservation, my best buddy from the program, who was a very skilled carpenter, had gotten a job working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, helping to reconstruct the Francis Little living room, which you see here. And it turned out that they actually needed an extra hammer, and I had some carpentry skills. So as I have had many times in my life, really fortuitous dumb luck, I got to work on this project, and it really changed my life, because seeing that room go back together and understanding it in great detail convinced me that I really should go back to school and get a master's in architecture, which was another 3.5 years of my life, which I did at MIT. And I grew up in Chicago. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. So after school, I couldn't find a job in Boston, quite frankly. So I went back and got a job in Chicago with a firm called McClear. It was a brand new firm, and I was just a little numbnut architect trying to learn to get my license. And this project came into the office 6 months later, which is the Rookery building, of course, by Burnham and Root, 1888. And it had a major remodeling by Frank Lloyd Wright in the mid-aughts, and so 1905 to 7. And you see on the right the image of what it was like when Wright was done with it. And it had suffered many other alterations in the 1930s. It had completely removed that Wrightian work, and there was a desire to return it back to that period. So our firm was hired. It's a long story how that happened. But anyway, I got assigned to that because I was the one person in the office at that time that really understood what preservation was about. And I spent 4 years of my life gladly learning about how to put stuff back together again. And it was a fantastic experience. And from that developed the preservation group, such as it was known at McClear. And I was there about 18 years. And then in 2006, McClear was acquired, well, actually a few years before that, McClear was acquired by AECOM, which some of you in the audience will probably know what that is. It's a big entity of about 80,000 architects, engineers, and construction-related people worldwide. And they didn't really get what Gunny did too much. They were really more worried about how much money is Gunny making us? And that wasn't a great story, frankly, because doing preservation work isn't really all about the money. Anyway, so I decided to leave there in 2006 and start my own firm with several of the people from my group, and we just began to do what we do, which is preservation work. In about 2011, we got this project, which is the Emil Bach House in Chicago. Have any of you been there? Have you stayed there? I can't see, but anyway, it was bought by Jennifer Pritzker of Tawani, the Tawani Foundation, Jennifer Pritzker being a billionaire, and she decided she wanted to restore the house, and we got engaged to do that. This is what the house looked like originally, but it had been altered significantly over the course of its life, and someone had filled in that beautiful open sun deck to create a sun room. But it really changed the way that the building was to be understood. So one of the main things we did was to take that off, to restore the entire outside, and to return the inside back to what it was architecturally. They then wanted to use it as a sort of like the building next door she also owned. That was an Airbnb situation, or bed and breakfast. And they wanted to use this that way, sort of as a supplement to that. And so they hired an interior designer who made it into a comfortable place, but some of the right features are still present, as you can see here. Another project that has quite a bit of similarity to the Krause House, the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park, is Samara, which is in West Lafayette, Indiana. And again, have any of you been there? It's not that far. It's a Usonian from right around the same time period, and it's the same similar brick and so on. And we recently were engaged to help restore the outside of this building, which had some major significant problems with the masonry, and that's been done. As I mentioned, I was here in 2018 to talk about Unity Temple, which was a $25 million restoration of, I would argue, probably Wright's greatest work, but I'm sure others in the audience might disagree. But anyway, that was a fantastic opportunity to really bring this building back to what it once was. And we know for a fact it was one of Wright's favorite projects throughout his whole career. He referred to it many, many times, and now you can go there and experience it like it was when it was new. Again, who's been here since it's been restored? Great. The rest of you need to come visit. I will say that it's in a bit of flux now about the ownership issues and so on, which is a little concerning. I'm hoping that that'll get sorted out. But the Unity Temple Restoration Foundation, which whole cause was to restore the building, they still exist, but there's nobody working there, so it doesn't really exist. And the congregation is taking care of it, but it isn't clear what's going to happen as far as going forward, what's going to happen. So stay tuned for that. Around that same time, we were also engaged by the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust, which is based in Oak Park. And they had done a lot of work on the Roby House, restored the outside, put mechanical systems in and so on, but they never really finished the inside. So they hired us to help them complete the interior restoration of that building. And it had a lot of similarities to Unity. They're both built around the same time. They were both prominently featured in the Wasmuth portfolio. And it was interesting. They're different in some ways, but also had these similarities. So it was a very great learning experience for myself and the folks in the office particularly about Wright's finished treatments in this period, this Prairie School period of his. As was also mentioned, we've had the great opportunity to work at other places such as Taliesin West in Scottsdale. Now, how many of you have been there? Yeah, those cold winters in St. Louis, you want to go visit Scottsdale. That's what Wright did. I mean, he migrated every year between Wisconsin and Arizona because it was health reasons, actually. And he did that from the late 30s until he died. So for the last 20 years of his life, this was the regular rhythm of their lives. The whole fellowship would move from I just came from this beautiful car exhibit, and all I could think about was Frank Lloyd Wright loved cars. He would have loved that show. And they would pack up everything and drive across the country and go to Scottsdale, and then in the spring after Easter they would pack everything up and go back up to Wisconsin until Thanksgiving. So we did a preservation plan for them a number of years ago, and we are still engaged with them on a few things. We haven't done any real physical work other than to help them do some ADA upgrades, but we are looking at ways that we might be able to emulate the original canvas roof system that was used on a number of the parts of the structure there. So they're trying to raise the money now so that we can actually implement that on his office space to see how that would work. And then there's Taliesin, where we have been recently working. We're still working there, actually. We just completed a conservation management plan for them, which was several years in the making. And as you can imagine, it's a very complicated place, a bit more complicated than the house in Ebsworth Park, but really, really fascinating. It was a really great journey that we went on. Fantastic people at the foundation to work with. And it includes both the house itself, Taliesin, and then all the ancillary structures around it. And they still need to do a landscape plan, which was not included in what we did, but is an integral part, of course, of what that place is. How many have been there? All right, you guys get around. That's good. And right now we're doing a project on what's known as Wright's Bedroom, which is the south wing of the house. It's sliding down the hill, and we're trying to figure out we've already done the documentation for the construction documents. Now they have to raise the money to fix it, which is not a small thing. It's actually quite complicated structurally. But we hope that that'll go forward in the near future. And part of that project is restoring the roof of that side of the house. And that also was a cedar roof. So we learned a lot from that as well that influenced what we think about the house in Ebsworth Park. As some of you may know, in 2019, there was a World Heritage elevation of the 20th century architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, which included 8 sites. They had originally tried to get 10 sites on it, which included the Price Tower and Marin County, but those were the first couple passes. They deemed the World Heritage jury, if you want to call it that, or the people that decided, said, those shouldn't be included for various reasons. And so they limited it to 8, and that was elevated in 2019. And what that means is World Heritage is, the highest level of recognition anywhere. There are about, I think it's 1,000 sites worldwide. In the United States, we have very few cultural sites. There's cultural and natural sites. The cultural sites in the U.S. include the Statue of Liberty, Independence Hall, Monticello, and the University of Virginia, Cahokia Mounds, which is just across the river from here, and a few other things. So it's one of only a handful, really, of sites in the U.S. that have been elevated to cultural heritage on the World Heritage level. And with that comes a lot of benefits, because it has now raised awareness about right in general. And all the other right sites, the several hundred right sites that still exist, have all gained benefit from the fact that he has now been seen as someone worthy of recognition at the World Heritage level. But with that also comes other requirements. All these sites have had to have these kind of detailed reports done to prove to the international audience that they are managing their sites in an appropriate fashion. And so I want to spend a little time talking about this planning document issue. We've done all kinds of, in 35 years I've been doing this, we've done all kinds of documentation exercises. It used to be the state of the art was something called a historic structure report. And you can see the one in the middle on the top, the Waukegan Carnegie Library, that we called an HSR, Historic Structure Report. And those are valuable documents. They have done the job for a long time, but what they don't do, and what the CMP does, and I'm going to go into this in some detail, is using, as Claire mentioned, a values-based approach to significance. And it's different than the traditional way things are done in the U.S., where the tradition has been that significance is determined by these 4 criteria as part of the National Register process. And this has been in existence now since the 1960s. 1966, the Preservation Act was passed, which created the National Register, and a whole lot of very good documentation and guidance is available through, at least it was until recently. I don't know what's going on now with the Park Service, but they have great things to read about to understand what that process is. But basically, the significance is derived from one of these 4, or one or more of these 4 criteria. Event, something happened there. A person, someone, like Washington slept here. That's how a lot of them started. Criterion C is design and construction, and this is where a vast majority of the sites that are there, and certainly right sites and so on, all have that criterion at least. And then D is information potential, which typically associated with archaeological sites, but it could also relate to some other things. But those are the 4 basic things, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that they don't really get into the multifaceted aspect of what could those mean and who does it mean it to. And that's where the values-based approach comes in. Once you've established why it's important and so on, and you want to do something to it, then you have to refer to the Secretary of the Interior Standards for the Treatment of Historic Properties, or known as the standards. And these are guidelines that help take you through what is and isn't appropriate for dealing with a building. And these are always referred to by the regulatory bodies that might be overseeing what's being done. If you get a federal or state grant in Missouri, the State Historic Preservation Officer will participate in reviewing what you're planning to do so that you don't mess things up. And it's really based on their interpretation of the guidelines as to how you get approvals or not. So this is the standard way, and we've done this. Every project we do, we like to think it meets the standards, whether it's required or not, because we think they're good guidance. But they don't really go in depth in the way that I think is more appropriate for certain places. And this comes out of the international realm. ICOMOS is the International Council of Monuments and Sites. I was one of the founding members of the 20th Century Committee of ICOMOS, and we did a lot of work in different ways, figuring out how to give help and guidance to people that were wrestling with what do you do with this more recent heritage. We can't figure out what are appropriate treatments. And many people refer to the Burra Charter, which was created by our friends in Australia in the 1970s. And the different thing, and this is where the values-based assessment comes from, is from the Australians and the Brits. But they were looking at how are these places valued? How are they thought about by the people that use them, by the stakeholders that take care of them, and all those sorts of aspects. And this is what's really heavily influenced the idea of what a conservation management plan is or should be. It was furthered by the Getty Conservation Institute in California, which in 2011, they began to give significant grants to important historic sites all over the country. Here's an example. This is a poster that was on a wall at a workshop that was held in Taiwan about, I guess, a year or so ago, and highlighting all the projects that they gave funding to. It was many millions of dollars over the course of the 6 years that they were doing this, 7 years they were doing this, and really important sites all over the world. So it's a fantastic reference. All of those documents are available online if you really want to dig deep and go see what it's about. I recommend you can Google the Getty Keeping It Modern program and you can find these things. They're very interesting, and there's quite a bit of difference in different ways that people approach this, but more or less they're all have the same components to them. In relation to that as well, because many countries, we are fortunate because we have the standards here in this country. We've had them a long time, so we all know how to work with them. But in many places, they have nothing, and the guidance is sort of figured out as you go. And so in 2011, a very good friend of mine who's an architect in Madrid had a conference looking at this issue about how do we talk about conservation approaches to 20th century heritage. And from that came what's known as the Madrid document, which has had several rewrites. And in 2017, it was made into what's called the Madrid New Delhi document, because it was adopted in New Delhi as being a document to refer to in international circles. So that brings us to Krause House, the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park. Who here has not been there? Come on. All right, that's good. Well, then I don't need to give you the whole history because you've all been there and had this excellent tours that they do. And that's fine. I wasn't planning to spend a lot of time, but you know that this house was a very, very personal story of Russell and Ruth Krause, Russell being a kind of a unusual artist type, and his wonderful wife. They wanted to have a little house, and they contacted Wright in '49, I believe, and he took a long time to even respond to them. He was a busy man at that time. And finally he said, you can have your little house, but you need to reduce your needs or whatever, if he was going to make it fit in their budget and so on, which they did. And then they set upon this long journey. It took them many, many years to both get the plans from Wright, find a contractor that was willing to build it because it was such an unusual geometry, and then to get it built and to get all the furniture done and everything else. It took them about 10 years to complete the thing before they really felt like their home was done. But it's a fantastic place, and that's, of course, an important part of its story. So we were engaged by the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth. That's a really big mouthful. I know that they prefer that to the Krause House, but the Krause House is so much easier to say. So anyway, we, through a long conversation with Catherine and Lydia and the others and some of the board members about, well, what would this be and what would that look like to have a guidance document to help us take care of the house? Because it's a very daunting thing. I mean, I assume that all of you live in an abode somewhere, and you all know that it doesn't take care of itself, that you have to do stuff regularly and take care of it. And the maintenance plan was really high on their minds. So that was the first thing we did, actually, was a maintenance plan. And then we dug in deeper to say, okay, how do we provide you all with some guidance that will last for a very long time, where whoever's there 10, 20 years from now, they can look back on this, revise it, update it, and still use it as a document that will help guide good decision-making about what to do with the house. And it consists of these basic parts. Actually, Greg Maxwell in my office, he took the Borough Charter and then he created this circular idea, this graphic, because it's really more of a circular, cyclical kind of a attitude about how you should take care of a place. And the first thing is to understand the place, then you understand the cultural value, you assess its cultural value, you identify what's important about it that is identified in the values, but how does it manifest physically in the place? And then you develop the policies out of that, and then of course you have to use it. So the process is basically these 4 steps. You have to you find the stakeholders. Who are the people that have something to say about it? And they're the ones that you huddle with and decide these are the values that we see today. Those could change over time, but those are the ones we see today. And then once you have the values, you say, how does that inform why it's important? How does it mean something, and who does it mean it to? And then you use those. The cultural significance helps to guide the policy making. How do you create policies of how to act and how to go about making decisions? And then the way that you use that is, of course, the management aspect of it. And these are the basic 8 steps. I don't want to kill you all with a lot of word slides, but these are the basic ways you go about it. And the most important thing, of course, is seeing what it is, figuring out what's important, developing these policies, and then implementing it. So in order to do that, we like to work collaboratively, of course, with our clients and others. And so we created a stakeholder group, which consisted of our firm, a number of other outside parties that, like the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy was represented, the State Historic Preservation Office was represented, members of the board and members of the staff, and a few other people that had knowledge and expertise about Wright or the house. And we all came together in a room for a couple days to talk about the values part. This is a matrix we made of the stakeholders, which you can break down to local, regional, national, and international. These are all people that may think they have something to say about the house. We went to the house. We spent a good bit of time there together, collaboratively looking at things, understanding it, getting everybody on the same page, so to speak, and hearing what people's reactions were and how they thought about the house. And I think this was a really important aspect, both to get us all on the same page, but also to build some bonding between all of us working on this collaboratively together to get to a good result. And so out of that came these values. And this is the list of the basic values. And I don't really want to read all this in detail. There's many pages on this in the document, so I don't have time to cover it all, but I will touch on what the basic ones are. So aesthetic value is derives from the ways in which people draw sensory and intellectual stimulation from a place. So what is your reaction to the aesthetics of it? That's the setting, the house in its environment. It's the furniture and everything, all the collection in the house, the way that the Krauss has had it, the material palette, how it's made, and so on. Architecture and design is always a key component, especially with something as important, a house that's designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And that, of course, relates to the grid. This is an unusual house. It's not the only one, but he did a few of these Usonians that were on the 60-120 parallelogram grid. It's a Usonian house, so it has a relationship to the other ones that he did for that 20, 30-year period. It has a relationship to 20th century architecture in general, and so on. The quality of light, that's another important aspect of this. Its historic value, this relates, in this case, it could relate to other things in other sites, but in this case, it's really about the story of the development of the house and the relationship of a client to the great architect. And there's incredibly great documentation. He kept all the letters, correspondence between himself and Wright, Russell did, and it was really valuable in getting to the project of the roof. Spiritual value, this is not necessarily related to God, so to speak, although with Wright, God and nature were kind of the same thing. And it can have that value. It can be a place directly, like a church would have obvious spiritual value. But even a house by Frank Lloyd Wright, when people go there, and maybe some of you experienced this when you went, you get this, there's a feeling, you get a sensory feeling, an emotional feeling that really, you get it. You feel it, you get it. Not everybody does, but a lot of people do, which is why his architecture is so powerful. And that's a little difficult to and I'm having a hard time articulating it right now. It's a hard thing to put down into words, but it's an intangible, okay? And that the Burra Charter, one of the things it really talks about is intangible heritage. So what are the things about it that are sort of just out there that aren't even related necessarily to the physical fabric, but just a sense and a feeling that you get, like the quality of light, that add value to the place. Its social value, so now that it's a house museum, it has a relationship to community. It has a relationship to the schools. It's a place of gathering. There can be events there and so on. So it has these values that are related to the social aspects, educational. It's obviously a wonderful place to teach people the rights ideas about organic architecture, and they do a lot of school group tours and individual tours where you can get some of that information, and also to hear about the Krauses. Scientific, this is a little bit harder to define in this case, but anyway, how does that overhang stay up there? Things like that, questions that you can then answer through what you find there. It has this beautiful environment that it's in. You drive up through the woods and the circuitous path on the road, which was very right in to have this path of discovery and when am I going to see it and all that. You get that anticipation going. And this place has all those things. It also has an economic value, a real estate value, if you will. It also has employment. It employs people. They take money in on the tours that give value and provide security to the taking care of the house and so on. It also has collateral economic value in the sense that someone might come for a tour and then they go off nearby to have a sandwich or do something else or whatever to spend money in the community. So there are a lot of different ways to think of that. And its use, that has to do with how is it actually used and what does that mean for maintaining its heritage in general. And of course, it was a house before. Now it's a house museum, which is a very different use, but nonetheless, that needs to be understood and taken care of. So once you have thought about all those different ways that the thing has significance, what are the physical aspects about the house that what we call the character-defining features, where it manifests itself in some way or other? And so we spent a good bit of time talking about that. Of course, as I mentioned, the geometry is really strong here, those overhangs, the use of light and shadow, the way the bricks are made, etc. And of course, inside the hearth, the fireplace is always a key component in a right house, and the inglenook, the bench that runs off to the side and so on. There are many other aspects to it. The red floors that he did in all his Usonians, the gallery, as it's known, where you walk along, it's the spine that connects all the spaces, the flow of space, the movement through the house, etc. And the things like the art glass that Russell designed, which are wonderful. The other thing that the group did as a whole was to sit together and talk about the strengths, challenges, opportunities, and threats. And again, I'm not going to read all of these because there are quite a few of them. But the idea is that with every site comes these things that you should identify so you're aware of them. And when you're thinking about what you want to do, you take those into account. In the case of the Kraus House, its strengths are you have a really strong leadership component. I mean, I think you're really lucky. I've worked with many not-for-profits. It seems most of my clients are in that category. And it's really important to have a strong leadership of the board. And if there is a subcommittee, in this case, the preservation committee, that all are dedicated thinking about how best to take care of the house. And the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Epsworth Park has that really strong component. It has a wonderful site. It has its relationship to Wright. Those are all strengths. It has a financial strength. The financial health of the organization seems to be very good, which isn't always the case, and that's something to be seen as a strength. So what are the challenges? Well, there are no bathrooms really that you can use. That's a problem at times. It has, parking challenges. It doesn't really have a good place to orient people. There's been a lot of talk about needing a visitor center there, and we'll see what the future holds. But that would probably be a good thing to take some pressures off the house in other ways. But that has to be done extremely carefully. Access to the house is for people in a wheelchair is really hard. And so, what can be done about things like that? And so with the challenges, sometimes there's opportunities, like, You have the ability to expand tours, to make special kinds of tours, figure out other ways to get people to understand the house and to enjoy the house. You have the ability to partner with other places, other organizations, other sites possibly. How do you grow? If you need to grow, is there a way to expand on the land side? Maybe if you need a place for a visitor center, maybe it's best not to put it on the site. Things like that are important to be thinking about. And then probably the most important thing are to understand the threats. And these are things that can be identified now, and there's going to be threats down the road that we haven't identified that you need to be wary of. And number one in people's minds, of course, is climate change. It is real. It's happening. I've heard this is one of the wettest springs you've had in St. Louis in a long time. And water is the enemy of all architecture. And this is another reason that the house's roof project is so important, to make sure that the envelope of the building is really tight. There's also the issue of what's going on around it. Are there any sites adjacent that could be developed and, put something that would have a negative aesthetic impact on the house? Making sure that it stays relevant and that people see that this is important. You all get it, but what about the rest of the world? Are they seeing that the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park is of value and needs to remain in community so that it can offer these lessons that we've just talked about? And maybe most important, other than the climatic thing, is the loss of institutional knowledge. This is something to always be aware of, that people come and go, unfortunately. That's the cycle of life. And people get new jobs, or they move away, or whatever it is. And with them goes a lot of institutional knowledge. And there's great documentation on the house, and it's of high value. But you need to also have that transfer of knowledge to the next generation or the next group of people that are going to have the responsibility for looking out for it. So, from all of that, then we created a statement of cultural significance. And I'm not going to read this. It's way too long, and I'll be asleep by the end of the time I've read it. But it encompasses basically all the things I talked about. All those values are distilled into a couple of brief paragraphs, and they could probably even be distilled even further. But anyway, this is what we came up with to talk about why one should care. And I get it, you all care, so I don't need to read this to you. From that, now we have the statement of significance, and that becomes sort of a guiding principle of understanding of the house, and everything that comes after that wants to relate back to making sure that the significance is retained through all those values. It's a complicated network of ideas and thoughts. And you come up with, and so then we went away. I'm sorry, the workshop thing. We did all this in the first workshop. We distilled it, we wrote it up, we brought it back and presented it, and then we went through it again, and then we talked about, well, what does this tell us, and how do we understand the house in relation to all of that? From that comes the periods of significance, preservation zoning, a conservation philosophy, and then the policies, which was the main work of that second workshop. And then how do you then implement this thing? And then we did a case study. So the periods of significance, in the case of the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park, there's really sort of three basic ones. One is the initiation phase, where they found the site, they contacted Wright finally agreed. That was kind of the first thing. And then the second thing is actually building the house. And that took, as I mentioned, a really long time, and they were really almost never done with it. And including Russell's building of furniture and things like that went up right to almost to the end for when he sold it in 2001. And then in 2001, it has a new life. So there's a sort of a break there between the Krause period and what came after, which is its current life, which was the restoration of the house by Eifler, also architect from Chicago, and just the formation of this new not-for-profit entity that was going to take care of the house in perpetuity. It's a long time. So these are the periods. Sorry, that's a great shot of Ruth when they were doing the foundation walls. And this is from the restoration. So the primary period of significance is seen to be 52 to 2001, which was when they built it and lived in it. Oops, sorry. So then preservation zoning is another exercise to figure out, what's the most important, what's important but not as important, and what doesn't really matter. It's basically three levels for this house anyway. And the thing is that pretty much the whole house is significant. So it actually made this fairly easy. It's not always the case. You know, some projects we've done, and in fact, Taliesin, because it's not just the main building, but it's all the other buildings too. It's very complicated, and not everything is blue. Because you have to have opportunities to do stuff. So you need to make some judgments about what to care about more. And in this case, though, it's very clear that the existing original house is really the most important, both the inside, with the exception of the shed, the tool house, which was supposed to be his original studio, but it was not. He didn't like the fact that it was small and no windows, so or virtually no windows. So he got right to change his mind and help him put it at the south end of the house, which is where the studio was for his whole time in the house. And of course, the outside, the immediate built stuff that's part of the house, all the courts and the terraces are a really significant piece of primary significance there. And tertiary, the minor significance, these are the things that are below grade. This is the basement. In the kitchen, there's a little mechanical space, and underneath the tool shed, there's also a mechanical space. So there you have very free reign of what you can do there. And of course, the site, you can never lose sight of the site, because that is of primary importance of understanding how the house sits in its setting, and getting to it, and all the things I talked about earlier that really need to be thought of very, very sensitively. Then we go into the treatment. So what do you do in these places? And I'm not going to read these in length because they go into some detail, but I will say, basically, the fundamental conservation philosophy is do as little as possible and only at what's necessary to achieve the goal. And that may sound really simple. It gets complicated when you really have something to address, but that's the basic underlying philosophy. And in doing so, it makes it rather straightforward. And when you're talking about spaces like this, you basically don't want to do anything except keep it clean and make sure that the roof isn't leaking or that the windows aren't condensating too much or things like that. This is the tool shed, and there are some elements in there that are important. They're original, like the cabinets and so on, which need to be cared for at a pretty high level. But you also have an opportunity to do something else in there if you really need to. This would be a better place to do it than in the house. And of course, in these basement spaces, pretty much anything can happen. And as I mentioned, the conservation philosophy, it's pretty straightforward. Don't mess up. But you also want to understand the change over time and to be able to express how that works. Oh, I'm running out of time. Speaking of time. So I'm going to go a little bit quick through this. So the policies I mentioned, there were 35 or 6 policies we came up with. I'm not going to go into all those. There's governance policies, best practices, use and management, conservation, general conservation of the property, maintenance and repair, that's a really important one. Infrastructure, that's about, the basic services to the building and so on. How do you address that if you need them to bring them in? And treatment of fabric, that's probably the most important one, or group of them, and then supplemental documents. So there's just a couple here, and I'm not going to read all these, but just read the headlines. Distinguish between original, early period, and new fabric. So you got to find a way when you do something that you leave a trace or be able to explain to the public what happened. This is totally in line with what the Secretary of Interior standards say, that there should be a differentiation somehow. And that's a matter of subtle interpretation of how you do that. And that's where good architects differ themselves from bad architects about how blatant that is or how well it's done or how subtle it is and so on. But it's a carefully considered approach. The conservation of the historic layering, so being able to tell that story, being able to see that story, they're almost the same, but they are different. There's a subtle difference in those things. And conservation works as an opportunity for interpretation. This is really important, especially in a house museum where you have these things going on, and it gives you a way to engage with the public, explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, how you came to make decisions about doing it. And it's a real learning opportunity, I think, that the folks in Ebsworth Park understand that this is going to be a good thing for them to be able to use it that way. And then removing significant fabric. So this is one, and the reason I'm bringing these up is that the roof project takes all of these into account. whenever you have to do something in a removal thing, you want to make sure you're not doing that arbitrarily and that you've thought it through really well, because once you remove it, it's gone. So you want to be very careful about how and why you do that, and back it up with good logical thinking and understanding of what it is you're doing. These are some of the supplemental documents. Nobody ever wants to hear when you finish a big report that, you need some more reports. But that's often the case, and we couldn't put everything into this document. There are other things that need to be thought about. In particular, landscape management plan would be really good here. Get rid of the invasives and other things that would involve to make a more healthy, robust site. And also the relationship to the strategic plan of the organization and relationship to other groups like the Park District and things like that. Those are important things to have written down so that everybody can refer to them. All right, so the case study was the roof, and we knew from correspondence, which I mentioned was really great, that the initial roof was to be of wood shingles. And Wright used wood shingles on many projects, including his own house. And this was intended for this house. So we know it from this correspondence. We know it from the construction documents. This is a note about the roof, and it says red cedar shingles. That's pretty clear, right? With shingles shall be certified grade number 1. They were also to be fireproof. And then there's this telegram that threw everyone in a bit of a tizzy, because it says clear cedar shakes. Well, I don't know how many people out there understand there is a difference between cedar shakes and cedar shingles. I mean, sometimes they get conflated, and I think in this case they were conflated, but they are actually different things. Shakes are bigger, thicker, rougher cedar elements, and shingles are typically sawn and they're more regular. But we do believe that they did actually use cedar shingles. We have here this notation about the roofer. It says fireproof wood shingles, and it also says here that the shingles were delivered. So we're very confident that they actually used shingles, also based on the photographic evidence, of which there is not a lot, but there is some, and there are important things to reference to. I don't know how well you can see this, but this was taken inside a plastic sheath at the Avery, which is why it's got that weird reflection on it. But nonetheless, this is an important shot of the house when it was first done. And then this shot on the left is really important because it shows in some detail the exposure of the shingles, as well as what's known as the modified Boston hip. That's the part where the ridge comes together, and is a critical visual point of this thing, but also something that Wright was big on, and he used many places, including at Taliesin. So in we believe that the house was already re-roofed twice. In the 60s it got re-roofed with asphalt shingles, and then we don't have documentation of that, but I'll tell you why we know that in a minute. And then in 91 they did it again. And one of the things that in the agreement about the 91 re-roofing, it says completely remove all existing wood and asphalt shingles. So it appears that they just maybe put the asphalt over the existing roof or tore off some of it or whatever. They did it in more of a haphazard kind of a way. But nonetheless, to do this re-roof in 91, they scraped all that stuff off. They fixed what was rotty or not sound underneath it, and then came back with an asphalt shingle roof. So that's what we have. We know that it was originally cedar shingles. We know it was replaced with asphalt. It's at the end of its life. It's really not in good shape at all. It's leaking, especially around the skylights and so on. So we have to do something. And it was an opportunity seen by the house, the folks that run the house, that here we could go back and actually restore the original house. And this ties all those things together I talked about, because you could make an argument to use asphalt again, because that's what Russell Crouse did. But it really does detract from the beauty and the clean lines and the meaning of what the original house was supposed to be and was for its first 20 years or whatever. And here again is the description of the hip shall be modified Boston type, and that's what you see in this illustration on the right. There's a great article written by this guy William Schwartz about the Matthews House in California, which is the very same time period, and it's the same roof basically. So that's of good value to us, and it's a complicated corner, and it'll take some skill. We're going to do some mock-ups and so on to make sure that they get that right. The skylights, as I mentioned, as was often the case with Wright Things, he was very famous for his leaky roofs. Have you ever heard the story about the wing spread? Okay. So, well, whatever, move your chair. So, if it's dripping on you, I don't care, fix it somehow. I don't know, he just didn't seem to be overwhelmingly bothered by it. Maybe he didn't get sued over it enough or something, I don't know. But nonetheless, when you have this unusual, not to say goofy geometry like you have on this house, and you get a skylight like this, the only way they could figure out how to do it was just take a piece of glass and some, sealant and put it down and hope for the best. And it worked okay, I guess, but it still leaks. And it always sort of did leak. When the rain comes driving from one way or another, or the snow is built up, it has a tendency to seep in and get on the finished materials down below, which is not good. You can see that here can you see the cursor? No. Where's that thing? One of the other things that we wanted to remedy is that they added this flashing everywhere. It's copper flashing. It does its job. It's not a bad detail. It's just that it really detracts from the original pristine beauty of what the house was supposed to be. And I'll show you a picture again in a minute. Here's what those skylights look like from above. And we want to make sure that when we replace the skylights that we do it in a way where the sight lines are retained like they are in this thing, where it's basically just a hole in the roof, which is the whole idea. We want to make sure that the drainage works well. At Unity Temple, the drains were undersized and it was a huge problem, which led to tons of problems with those roofs over its many lives. And we don't want to have that here again. On the flat roofs, we're going to use a very modern technology. It's a Sikaplastic system. It's basically a liquid applied urethane, and it allows us to get right up to the edge of the edge of the wall. And I'll show you in a second that detail. They've just used it out in California at Marin County. We used a similar product, not the exact product, on Unity Temple. It's been performing beautifully. So we're very confident that this will be quite helpful in solving leaky roof problems on the flat areas, which you can see here. This is one of the flat roofs. And again, this thing is a bit bothersome for some of us purists, and that's what we are, because it didn't have that originally. You can see the detail here. The roof came up, there was a flashing here, and the wood is exposed all the way, and you get this beautiful clean line here, and it meets the sky. And the same thing over here, okay? The brick meets the sky. So we feel that with the modern technology and the ability to redetail this, that we can actually get rid of that big clunky flashing and go back to what it was originally. Here's the one on the top of the brick elements. And here will be the detail for that. There's a drip here, and then it connects in, and the waterproofing actually comes right up to there. And it was similar to what they did, but the material that we have available to us is going to do a much better job than what they had then. And again, you see this line. It's pretty unambiguous. There's nothing there. It's just the brick in the sky. So it'll go back to that. And that's it. I think we have a few minutes for questions.
If you have any questions, please just raise your hand and Dan or I will come over to find you. Oh, right here. Gotta get real close to it.
Actually, two questions. Well, let's start with number one. You mentioned how water is architect's biggest fear. As a contractor, it was mine throughout my whole career. When you were going to replace this roof, are you going to envelop the whole roof? I know here in Missouri, I've been here 2 weeks. We've had like 3 days, 4 days of beautiful weather, and it's rained like a mad dog the rest of the time. once you open up that roof, you're going to have your problems with also wind issues if you just tarp it. How are you going to go about protecting this from the elements to come while you have this roof removed?
Yeah, this is a problem on any roof project, and that will be incumbent upon this. So that's the successful contractor to make sure that he does that. And of course, we'll go over all that to make sure that we're in concurrence with how they do that. But you basically do have to, if it depends, I don't know whether they're planning to completely remove everything at once, or they're only going to do it in stages. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. It's not a huge project, but it is, there is a lot of area to cover, and they're definitely conscious of the fact that they're going to have to be covering up their work every day, making sure that that doesn't happen, and they have to do whatever they have to do to secure it. You said you had 2 questions. Not that, whatever, maybe that was enough. Yeah.
Yeah, Gunny, I was wondering how you train volunteer docents to interpret all the complicated cultural interpretation and history that you've spent days and days workshopping and developing.
That's a great question. I'm not really the one to answer that because I don't actually have direct involvement with the docent program, but I know that their docents are quite good. And I'm sure, I don't know how they're addressing that, but we have talked about the fact that they want to incorporate these ideas into what they tell the public about it. So I'm not sure how that's actually being done. Lydia is here somewhere. Maybe she can, you want to answer that? Did you hear the question?
So we have there we go. So yeah, we have a pretty robust docent program and docent training program. One of the ways that we'll be doing that is that we're doing it today. Most of our docents are here today. We will be doing follow-up with them throughout the construction project and once the roof is on. Our docents have a really hard job because, as you can tell, Gunny just talked for an hour just about this aspect of the house. But part of the thing when people come to the house is they want to hear about Ruth and Russell. They want to hear about Russell's artwork. They want to hear about, what the material is that the house is built from. So our docents work really hard, and we work with them to make sure that we're distilling that information down into what, the visitor wants in that hour. But we work very hard to make sure our docents feel comfortable and have a lot of good knowledge at hand.
And we certainly encourage the docents to read the CMP. It's there. It's not there to sit on a bookshelf. It's there to be used. And I think I mentioned this, but it's really also very important to think about it as a cyclical thing that needs to be reviewed in some serious way every year and probably rethought every 5 years or so. The Sydney Opera House is really the mother of all CMPs. Goes back to the Sydney Opera House when they made that a World Heritage Site before it was even 30 years old, I think. And they created their CMP is a many 100-page document. It's a huge, complicated building. And they redo that CMP, every 5 years. I'm not suggesting that they need to do that at Ebsworth Park, but you do need to keep it relevant, and the only way to do that is to go through it. And this is something that I think the board understands, and that certainly the Preservation Committee will be looking at that to make sure that it's doing what it needs to do for them, because if it isn't, then it needs to change. Yeah.
You mentioned that light is a very important concept in the space, and when you go to that house, it is almost like a religious experience. There is definitely a feel for it, but nature does its own thing. And I was curious as to whether or not Frank Lloyd Wright or Mr. Krause thought about the tree growth, and the house looks different from when they lived in it to 50 years from now, what the trees will look like. So was there guidance left about what to do about landscaping, or do you have guidance for that?
Well, the guidance is they need a landscape management plan. So, I don't mean to be flip about it, but that's a complicated thing. Landscape is a really fantastic, beautiful, wonderful, but complicated thing because it's growing, it's always changing. The main thing about what's there now and how it has pretty much always been was, as I mentioned, you come off that main road, you go up the windy drive through the woods, which are way overgrown right now, in my opinion. I think there's quite a bit of invasives, probably like there's everywhere, but that can be dealt with if you understand what it is and how to do it. And then you have the persimmon grove, which has always been a part of why the house is where it is and the relationship to the house. I know that they're very conscious of taking care of those trees, but all trees have a life. So what is the plan for, replanting, regeneration? I can't answer that, although I know that they're conscious of it. I don't even know if they have the plan, but they know that they need to deal with that over the long term. So it is something that people are thinking about and is an important part of really understanding that place.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. We got one over there and one right over here.
I was just curious, the life expectancy of a cedar roof and how that factored into all the different factors in making the decision to restore it like the original. And, that's obviously an economic issue as well going forward.
Yeah, it's not a little thing for sure, because it's a major expense, and it doesn't live forever, but neither does an asphalt shingle roof. I think the life expectancy should be at least 20 years, and maybe more if we're good with it and take care of it. One of the challenges is that it's such a low pitch, and it actually works better on a steeper pitch, but this is the pitch that we got. So it'll have to keep an eye on it. If you lose a shingle or two, you got to make sure somebody gets up and fixes it before it, gets worse. I just put a cedar roof on my garage in Chicago, and it's not a small thing to deal with. So I understand personally how it is. The hope is that it'll last, almost as long as an asphalt shingle roof would, but it isn't the same material, so it probably won't be the same performance. But it's so much more beautiful. And it's what they had originally. Yep.
This may be heretical, but would some kind of synthetic cedar shingle be not acceptable? I don't know what, fiberglass or whatever.
We talked about that.
Would not rot.
We considered that, actually. We talked about that, but that was discarded, I'd say. By everybody agreed that was probably not what we wanted to do here. I mean, if we were going to do that, then I would say just go back with the asphalt, because as I said, you could justify an asphalt roof again there. We talked about this too, that it's possible, because this is what was there. And it even meets the Secretary of Interior standards, which I didn't even talk about in relation to the roof, but we do know that what we're doing meets the standards. And the standards also say that you are not required to restore something. You're required to maintain it, to preserve it. If you do something, either you have to match what's there, or going back to what was there originally is also an acceptable treatment. Going to synthetic, fake cedar shingles, maybe they would agree in Missouri. I don't know. That would have to be a discussion with the SHPO to see if they think that's okay. But I haven't ever seen one that looks the same as a beautiful, real cedar roof. Not to say it won't be available 20 years, 30 years from now. I don't know. We'll see. Or I might not see it, but some of you will see it. Is that it? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your attention.